Hi everyone, thanks for clicking on this episode. Today we're going to be talking about NeRFF.
Dun, dun, dun.
And what that means for you and your communities. So if you are interested in hearing from two of our experts, Jamie and Stefan, stay tuned. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Water Cooler with NeDNR. Today it's me, Devin, and
Alexa, hi.
And today we have two special guests from our floodplain division or section. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves and then kind of talk about a little what you do for the department?
Sure. My name's Stefan Chapay. I'm an engineer in the floodplain management division. We do a lot of technical mapping for FEMA, so we are essentially contracted by FEMA to update flood maps throughout the state.
Spin the mic.
And I'm Jamie Ranke. I'm the team lead for the floodplain management division, and I manage both the NFIP coordination grants and the mapping grants, and just make sure that we're doing the best that we can to serve Nebraska.
So today we are going to be talking about NeRFF.
No.
Not that kind of NeRFF.
Aw,
Today
okay.
we're going to be talking about one of the awesome projects that Floodplain Division has been working on. Do you guys just want to tell us what NeRFF stands for and a little bit about that application?
Sure. So NeRFF stands for the Nebraska Real-Time Flood Forecasting Site. It's a web application for everything flood-related, essentially. And this was brought on after the 2019 event that devastated Nebraska. So it's a site to be proactive about looking at where your flood risk is in the event of imminent flooding.
So where do people go to get to NeRFF? I know that it's probably listed a couple places.
Sure. So you can get through DNR's main webpage. If you go to the floodplain tab, there's a tab underneath that for interactive maps where it pops up. But if you remember the name NeRFF with two F's, you can just go to NeRFF.Nebraska.gov.
That's easy.
Yeah. Okay, so once you're at the NeRFF website, it's going to look something like
Hopefully
this.
it looks just like this. So what you're seeing here is 46 different sites across Nebraska where we have data for, and I'll get into what data we have for these sites in a little bit. But green essentially means we have no flooding going on, so the majority of the state and the majority of the time you're going to come to this site and you're not going to see much but green dots, which is good. Mm-hmm. But you can see we do have one purple dot. If there was flooding going on, you would see a different color like this purple dot here. Gauge near North Platte, which is near flood stage, which is why you see yellow here. Another thing to point out is it has a halo around it, which is also yellow. That halo represents what the flood stage is projected to be. So currently we're near flood stage. We're expected to stay there. But if we were expecting maybe in the next 24 hours to see a major flood, you would see a purple halo around that yellow dot to let people know there's flood stage coming. If you wanted to get a look at the state as a whole, we have a bunch of additional gauges on here as well. You can see up near on the Niobrara, we have some minor flooding occurring. You can see the current stage is at 6.09, so we must be peaking around there because the forecasted stage is lower than the current, even though it looks like it's turning upwards. If you click on the gauge, you can get some additional information on it. Give it a second to load. So these are all the gauges in this state. The ones we showed initially are the gauges with simulation, which is what I'll show next. So these 46 sites, this is where the majority of the money for this project was poured into, was at these sites. So before all of this data was available, but we took it one step further with this site where you can actually relate a flood stage within a map on an aerial. So if we click on, for example, Big Blue River at Beatrice, and we click on this flood simulator tab, this will take just a second to load. Oh, that was quicker than I thought. I lied. But it's going to pop up this little slider down here. So you can see we're at a 3.58 stage right now, which is below anything flooding. We get near that flood stage at the 16-foot mark. So if we start moving that slider across here, you start to see what this actually looks like on a map, which you can already start to see what benefit this would be for a community. So the number one call we got during 2019 is, what do I do with my community? Who do I evacuate? If you're projected to get to a 36-foot stage, that community can contact us, or not even contact us. They can get on this map directly and pull that up and look at individual properties themselves. And let me switch it over here. I'll turn on an aerial imagery.
So
this will take a minute to load over.
something that I'm noticing with the drag bar is that right now it says the record stage was 33 feet on October 12th of 1973. That's pretty cool that you can go back and see the historical data.
Yeah, so any of our gauges on here, if they have this flood simulator button, which the 46 that initially loaded do, we have that record stage loaded in here.
So one thing that we like to point out to people, and we have received this question before, this actually won't have any effect on flood insurance rating. These are non-regulatory maps. They were not funded through the FEMA grant program that we typically do our mapping in. It's just additional information for communities to use. Like Stefan said, in 2019, we had a lot of questions coming from the Emergency Operations Center requesting inundation maps for the areas that were going to be heavily impacted so that people could prepare in advance. But the problem is, if you don't have the inundation boundaries already created, it takes a lot of processing power to get those boundaries to a point that they can be useful. So we wanted to be proactive and have some of these available beforehand. And hopefully we'll be adding sites to this map every year. We're attempting to get funding to do that every year. So we won't just end at 46 gauge sites. We would like to have coverage throughout the state.
So you'll also notice on here we have a little button at the bottom which says view depth. So another way of looking at this data is by how deep that water is getting rather than just am I in or am I out. You could actually look at, say, this property here, click on the screen and see, okay, if it's 36 stage height, I'm getting about half a foot of water, a little bit more at that location.
Oh my gosh, that is super interesting.
Yeah, I honestly, before today, had no idea that it did all of this. That's really cool.
Yeah, there is a lot on here that if any general user wants to get on and click around, there's quite a bit to go through that I can't quite cover in a whole podcast, but yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff on this site.
You bring up an interesting point that I'm going to ask a question. If somebody or a community or a school or an NRD wants to have additional training or wants more information on this, does the floodplain division go out and do community outreach or anything with this?
We do. Right now, most of our outreach has happened through web blasts or email, gov delivery, or we've done a couple presentations at different conferences. We do have the capacity to go out and do classes through grant funds that we get from FEMA. So we always do a map reading class through our NFIP group that goes through our interactive map. As part of that map reading class, we are starting to add NeRFF to that, especially when we start doing outreach with communities that have the simulation available. So we are mapping in some of the areas that have that available. So when we start doing outreach with those communities as part of the mapping project, we can showcase how to use the site for those floodplain administrators and community officials.
That's great. So if a community had the flood simulation, who could they contact to have anybody come out and kind of demonstrate their area on the map?
They can reach out to me or Michelle York, our administrative assistant. She is the one that helps coordinate a lot of our training. And we send out a survey every year asking floodplain administrators what type of training they'd like to see. Maybe there's a topic that we haven't covered. We are flexible and want to get information out to communities that they need rather than just doing the same presentations every year. So yeah, just reach out to anyone, honestly, and the floodplain section can get it to the right person. So as long as we know that it's information that you guys want, we can put a training together for it.
That's great. I'll also just say that if you reach out to anybody at the agency, we'll just forward the email to floodplain too.
Yeah,
So.
you can email Alexa or I, but we'll have to pass it along.
There also happens to be this contact button on this page, which will just link you to anyone on the floodplain team, and anyone on that team can help you out.
That's pretty dandy.
Yeah, you were thinking forward on that.
So what else can you do with this? What other cool
Sure.
things can you show us real quick?
Let's see. So we have 2 tabs here down at the bottom. I was just focusing on the stage aspect of this. But also part of this project we did by frequency. So if a community had a mapping project that was published by FEMA, they have what's called a flood insurance study. Within those studies, we have flows related to recurrence intervals. So you could look at flooding in a different perspective rather than just stage and say, okay, what's the 100-year flood would be the more common term, which is the 1% annual chance flood, and see what that looks like using this model.
Oh, a return interval.
Correct.
Oh my gosh, I know what that means. They have done that for like groundwater modeling too. The 100-year flood is a 1% chance, right? Mm-hmm. Although I think Elijah once said that you don't like the 100-year term, correct?
Correct. We try to avoid using that because we get the sense that people, if they've seen a 100-year flood in their lifetime, don't expect another one to occur, right?
Oh, okay.
But in actuality, it's a 1% chance any given year. So while unlikely, you could see that in back-to-back years.
Okay.
I was thinking
see it more than once in a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said 100-year flood, and I was exactly thinking that. I'm like, oh, okay, like that's fine. Like once.
We're good till 2019
Check that
happened.
box.
We're good.
I always use that when I'm talking the 100-year flood because then people understand what I'm talking about and then refer them to the correct terminology.
Okay,
So
yeah,
there's
it's probably
not
for the best.
confusion. Some other things we have on here, I don't think there's any radar in the area today, but you could see weather radar for the state, and this is the same high-resolution radar that the National Weather Service uses. Yeah, I don't think we have anything going on. But one thing that's really cool that you can pair with that radar, let's go back to Beatrice here. Next to this flood simulator button, you see this show watershed. And you can see everything upstream of that gauge. So if we had some weather activity going on upstream, you could kind of get a sense of, okay, is that going to impact my gauge? Is it falling within this region? Or is it maybe on the other side there, where I maybe don't need to worry as much?
That is cool. That is super cool.
Some other features, we have just some other data in this map that you can bring in. If you wanted to look at the FEMA regulatory floodplains and compare them to the different stage inundation boundaries that we showed earlier, you could look at those. We also have points for critical facilities for communities. So, you know, your hospitals, your schools, those sorts of things can be highlighted a little bit. Levees, if a community has a levee, we have information on that. And it'll link you directly to the Corps of Engineers page for information on that levee. All the dams in the state, if you need any information on dams. And then weather watches and warnings. I believe we do have one going on today up. I think we looked at that earlier on the Niobrara. Mm-hmm. So if we turn that on, it might be loading.
So you mentioned like critical infrastructure and showing those kinds of layers. Since NeRFF's launch, what person or group of people use the application the most, would you say? Like who's had the most benefit, would you guess?
Well, we've launched this site, a few months ago?
Yeah.
So our flooding impact hasn't been a lot. We have had one community, I believe it was Cambridge. Is that right, Jamie? Cambridge had some flooding, and this was before we even had data for them available on this site, but we were in a place where the modeling was complete. It just wasn't put onto the site yet. So we were able to actually use that data to provide that emergency manager and that floodplain administrator for that community to say, here's what's projected to happen, here's what that physically looks like on a map.
That's really
And
cool.
we got really positive feedback on that and that quick response. And that's just something we weren't able to do in 2019 just because of processing time. It takes a lot of effort to put these models together.
And it takes away a lot of that ambiguity, like, oh, there's like a flash flood warning in your community, but you're not exactly sure like where that would impact immediately. So that's really cool.
Right. And unless you have someone that's been there, that's been through several floods, they might have a sense of this is what a 20-foot stage feels like. But if you go beyond that, it's anyone's guess until now.
My mind went to this could be done at a school for like a school project of like pick a community and like show what would happen. And I don't know. I just think that it's very interesting. And I think anybody, even if you're not necessarily within a community that might be flooding, that you would be interested to see in your area what would happen if the flood stage was 50 feet.
It's interesting that you say schools. That's a dream of mine for our group to get into schools and start doing more outreach with younger audiences. I think that's really how we get the message home to the parents that are likely the community leaders. And, some of these kids, especially in small town America, they grow up to be the community leaders. And if you get the messaging about what flood risk looks like and things that you can do, decisions that communities can make before they're doing development in areas that they shouldn't, I think that's really the way that we become more resilient as a state, as a nation, is if we start doing that outreach with younger people and have them shaping their future, shaping their communities.
They're aware of the resources that are, there for them, being proactive.
And the resources that are available are so complex that it's really hard for a lot of the more seasoned people in their positions to understand it because they have so many different things that they're doing, that if we could pull in some of those additional resources that maybe they're not directly working for a community, but they could help do some of the research or whatever. I just think the more people we have on the ground helping spread the message, the better off we'll all be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and like Jamie just said, if you guys are interested, if you have a classroom that you think would really enjoy a demonstration of this kind of resource, don't be afraid to reach out.
These models for these 46 sites were very detailed. We had survey for all of the structures. This was a huge undertaking as far as a modeling perspective goes. And, from an end user, you don't really get that when you're looking at it. It's going to look similar to someone else who just ran a quick model that took 5 minutes and they get a rough boundary. These models are accurate and they will serve a very good purpose. We did have a community reached out to us and said, this map is wrong. And that was I won't call out the community, but they were right. And the reason is there was a culvert or something that allows flow into this field. That floodplain administrator has been with that community a long time to know that this is the first thing that floods, and it's kind of the trigger for when they need to start worrying. And that's something that we can look at with our modeling. That was a culvert that was under a huge railroad that was covered in brush. Unless you knew it was there, you're not going to model that in your model. So that's something a community, if they're listening to this podcast or they know there's something that doesn't look quite right with their community, they can reach out to us, and we can, since we have all the models, we can rerun those and make it reflect what they're seeing in the field.
That's nice that it's like you're working with the communities to develop the models. You're talking to them and updating it as you find out more information.
And that means that you guys have been doing some pretty good outreach then, that somebody knew, like, hey, this isn't quite right, and they were able to find the right person to reach out to. So that speaks a lot about you guys.
The other thing that communities can provide, the critical infrastructure layer that we have, is rough right now. It was the best information that was available to us statewide. However, if communities are getting in and seeing that that information is not accurate, send us a layer that has everything flagged and we'll update it for your community.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming to talk to us about NeRFF. It's a really interesting application, and I've created some social posts just in the future, just be like, hey, look at this thing that we have. I didn't know it could do all of that now, so I'm gonna have to go back and edit my graphic to show some of this cool stuff. But do you have any other final questions that you want to ask?
Well, I guess I question, statement, comment. So future updates for NeRFF is just incorporating more community feedback, expanding the flood simulations. So you have more than just the 46 sites. Is there anything else that your team's been working on to kind of like, I don't know, look forward to a community that's already been on the website?
Sure. So this site, our goal with this site is really to be a living site. So we want it to be changing year to year and adding more information. The hope is for it to be really that one-stop shop in the event of flooding, that you have everything you need, all the resources on here. So even if you're showing a gauge, we have links to the DNR site for this gauge, the USGS site for this gauge, the National Weather Service site for this gauge. So any data that you really need. In the near future, we will be having, there are a few gauges out there, maybe 10-ish or so, that have high-vis cameras on them. So we'll have links to that on this site for those gauges. That'll be really helpful, especially for seeing if there's ice on the rivers. Those are nice. Other than that, just some bug fixes type things, general maintenance updates that'll be occurring relatively soon, and then down the road it's going to be focused more on adding those additional communities.
The high-vis would be super cool just to see, like, if there is an event, you can see it pretty much real time. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, we're really excited to have that too. And we're hoping to add some more high-vis cameras to the network working with USGS. The other thing that I'd like to point out before we're done is there are a number of caveats that are applied to a number of these sites. So when you first enter the site, there will be a disclaimer that kind of outlines what was considered, what wasn't. So if you're a community that has a levee that likely was not looked at as part of the inundation boundary, and ice is another, we know that we have ice jam flooding, but there are so many different scenarios that come into play for ice jam flooding, and there's not a standard methodology for doing that type of modeling in HEC-RAS 2D right now. So ice is not considered as part of this study either.
That's good to know.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with us and showing us the website. I'm really excited about it now that I know more.
Well, yeah, and I'm excited for what that means for communities and schools, and just getting kids excited about this kind of stuff is really inspiring. So thanks again for your hard work on all this, and be looking out for more shout outs about NeRFF if you're just scrolling Facebook or Instagram and you want to link to something. We'll provide it occasionally. All right, thanks guys.
Break time's over.
Break time's over.